right, if you thought colons were exciting, you're weird. But here we go with semicolons. So a semicolon, a lot like a colon. Remember, a colon, two dots, semicolon, dot over a comma, like that. There we go. So there's four rules for the semicolon. The first couple are the most important. Let's go through those ones first. You use one to separate main clauses. And again, that just basically means full sentences, as long as they're not already joined by a coordinating conjunction like and or but. So here's an example for you. Streaming services have changed the way we consume media. Being able to watch what we want on demand in the comfort of our living rooms has made going to movie theaters obsolete for most people. So where are we going to put the semicolon in this sentence? Well, where there's a natural pause, excuse me, right after the first sentence. So streaming services have changed the way we consume media. You can feel that pause right there as the next sentence begins. So we'll put the semicolon right there. Unlike colons, we do not capitalize the next word. So being will remain uncapitalized. That's rule one, and that's the most common semicolon rule. The second one is use a semicolon to separate main clauses when they're joined by a conjunctive adverb. These are words like however, therefore, nevertheless, moreover, furthermore, consequently, and also expressions like for example or for instance or that is. So here's an example of that. I'm a big fan of Tom Cruise's movies. However, I'm not a big fan of his religious opinions. A little bit of a nut job, if we're being honest. But the semicolon here is going to go right after movies and right before the conjunctive adverb, however. And again, it's separating two main clauses. I'm a big fan of Tom Cruise's movies. That stands alone. So does I'm not a big fan of his religious opinions. Our third semicolon rule is you'll use it to separate items in a series when that series already contains commas. So this is basically just eliminate confusion. These last two semicolon rules are about that. The example here shows three contemporary writers who have helped capture the African American experience are Nikki Giovanni, a poet, Alice Walker, a novelist, and Lorraine Hansberry, a playwright. So what I do with these is I pretend that the second part is not there. So I ignore a poet, I ignore a novelist, and if we're making a list, we're just going to put a comma. Nikki Giovanni, comma, Alice Walker, comma, and Lorraine Hansberry. We're going to put a comma there as well. So when do we put the semicolons? After the part that describes them. So Nikki Giovanni, she is the poet. And I want to just make sure everybody understands that by kind of cordoning it off right here. Nikki Giovanni, a poet, with that semicolon. Alice Walker, a novelist, semicolon. And then, of course, at the end of the sentence here, we're not going to put a semicolon. Lorraine Hansberry is a playwright, but the sentence ends, so we will put a period. Here's another simpler example of it. Paris, France, Edinburgh, Scotland, and Salzburg, Austria are the three coolest cities I've visited. That's a fact. If I just said Paris, Edinburgh, and Salzburg, I would have put commas. Paris, Edinburgh, and Salzburg. But because these come with the countries as well, we don't want to have Paris, wow, Perry, comma, S, huh? We don't want to have Paris, comma, France, comma, Edinburgh, comma, Scotland, comma, Salzburg, comma. It gets confusing. So Paris goes with France, and then we will just section that off. We don't need to have pop-ups here. What's going on? All right. And then we got another one right here after Scotland. Paris, France, Edinburgh, Scotland. And of course, we won't put one after Austria because we're done with our little list. The final rule, and this is one that you probably will never use in your own writing unless you become very, very prolific as a writer, as a speaker of words. I'm really struggling here at 7:49 a.m. You use a semicolon to separate two main clauses that are joined by a coordinating conjunction, again, like and or, but when such clauses already contain several commas. In other words, if there's already a bunch of commas, you might use a semicolon to separate the two sentences. Langston Hughes, comma, perhaps the most famous figure of the Harlem Renaissance, comma, wrote poetry, comma, fiction, comma, music, comma, and drama. So if we put another comma here, it just might make things more confusing. We can give the reader a break by putting a semicolon there. And then the second part, but he is also remembered as a patron of the arts, comma, a man who nurtured the career of others. So we got like half a dozen commas already, and we can just make things a little bit easier by putting a semicolon in the middle. So those are your four semicolon rules. And when you go to Schoology and you take your little semicolon practice, it's going to be just like commas in that rather than have drop-down menus, you're going to highlight the word or words where a semicolon would follow. So I'll do this first one here for you. George Washington was born on February 22nd, 1732, became president on April 30th, 1789, and died on December 14th, 1799. All right, clearly we have a list here, and clearly that list has already got commas after the 22, after the 30, and after the 14. So, because we have this list, we're going to put semicolons after 1732 and after 1789. And then you can see those things are together. February 22nd, 1732, April 30th, 1789. All right, so that's the deal. Again, make sure you've taken it enough times to get at least half right. There are 15 of these sentences here this time. And then next week, we'll do a little colon, semicolon assessment.